This is me.
Yes, can hear you.
I think we can let people in. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone.
Hi, a very good welcome to everyone present over here. We thank you for taking this time this Friday evening to join us for this exciting conversation. Backbenchers is an informal learning space where individuals like you interested in policy, governance, education, or development come together to shed light on topics of mutual interest, enriching a collective learning. We call these sessions backbenchers because backbenchers is inspired by the insightful thinkers often found at the back of the class, the ones unafraid to pose challenging questions that keep the teachers on their toes. My name is Steffi, and I work at Adhyayan Foundation as part of the project of compiling a body of practitioners' knowledge that we will share with every one of you through Abhyas platform. All those of you who are in Mumbai, please block your calendars because we are going to be having the launch of Abhyas soon, happening on the 21st of June. So today, I'm your moderator for the session, and before we proceed, let's go over a few housekeeping rules. To start with, please keep yourselves muted throughout the session. If possible, please keep your videos on. Also, rename yourself with your name and your organization's name. And if you have any questions through the session, please add them in the chat box. The team will compile all of them for the question and answer session in the second half. So now let's move on to the most exciting part, introducing our esteemed speaker, Subir Shukla. We wanted to introduce Subir in a meaningful way that captures the essence of today's conversation. So here's a small story to start off with. The story takes us back to 1986 when Subir joined Eklavya and was teaching in government school. Even though he was not a teacher, he was among the very few at that point of time to be able to teach in government school without being a government teacher. So when he was there during his time, Subir visited the home of one of his students to understand why the child had been absent from the school for several days. Upon arriving, he discovered that the child's father was bedridden and his mother had ventured into the forest to find wood as the family had gone without food for several days. Subir couldn't say anything. He returned back to the school without uttering a word. A few days later, the child returned to the school, prompting Subir to ponder on a profound question that still resonates with him. What are we doing to justify the child's presence in school? What are we doing right to ensure that his time is valued? So, these are the questions that inspired Subir to embark on a journey where curriculums are designed and implemented with child's need and context at the forefront of everything we do. We are very honored to have Subir join us today and share a piece of his heart. Welcome, Subir. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Steffi. I'll share my screen. I have some points which I want to share with everyone. Let me see if I can. Yeah. So, all right. Is it visible? Is it legible?
Yes, it is.
Excellent. So friends, I'm not going to give you any long introduction. I'm going to get straight into the discussion. And I'm going to speak very fast because I have to cover a lot. The broad structure is that I will share with you the context of this journey, which began in the mid-1990s of working with the government to develop curriculum over the last 2.5 decades. And then what are some of the key lessons we learned? What really is the place of curriculum in the overall quality ecosystem? What have we learned about the process and flow, which we have been able to successfully repeat in many different contexts, and it has led to good results. And I will, if there is time at the end, I'll give you an example from our recent work in Rajasthan, which was done after the pandemic till now. And maybe make a comment or two about where do we go from here. I hope to have at least half an hour left over for question and answers so that all of you can raise your points. Now, the tendency when we look at curriculum is to think that nothing much happened before, but actually quite a lot has happened before. Take a look at this language learning objective from 1995. It's from the primary education curriculum of Gujarat. To listen patiently to an argument one disagrees with. You won't find such statements in curricula today. Another aspect, if we tend to think, well, we have made a lot of progress, is to look at what are all the actions that a curriculum is expected to trigger in a classroom between teachers and children, or among children themselves, or a child on his or her own. Take a look at this long list. Of course, this applies all the way from nearly preschool to class 12. And I'm not going to read it out. You can just take a look at it yourself. What you will find is that if you think of different subjects, different classrooms, you might be able to add many, many more actions or verbs to this list. But what you will also find, if you look back at your own experience or your children's experience, you will find that very few of these actually happen in our classroom. That should be a matter of concern for us, that we can conceptualize, we can imagine so much, but actually do so little. And the whole problem is that a curriculum, whatever it is as a document, but for the child, it is what actually happens. That is the curriculum. Unless we keep that in focus, we are not really doing justice. So when this journey began, before something like DPEP came about in 1995, we had the 1986 policy. I'm not going beyond that right now. But we had two major contenders for national curriculum in place. And interestingly, from 1986 policy onwards, and even earlier, we always had this idea that there would be a national curriculum framework. Initially, there were only 10 big points which every state was supposed to keep in mind, and slowly something like what we now have as NCR began to emerge. NCRT interestingly conceptualized something called a learning continuum. They thought it is not a good idea to differentiate between class 1 and 2, between class 3 and 4, and they were in the process of making that. But then the MHRD was very keen to hold teachers accountable, and they worked with an expert from UNESCO Institute in Hamburg to create the minimum levels of learning. Ultimately, this one got implemented and NCRT's learning continuum got left behind. Around this time, there were several NGOs that the NGO sector had just begun working in education in a certain way. They were not allowed to work in schools till that time. So Eklavya was one of the first. Srujanika, Vidushri, there were several organizations that worked, and they also made their own curriculum. So we were in a situation where there were many contenders for what curriculum should be like. That is when in India, we followed up from our commitment at the Jomtien conference. The Jomtien conference in 1993 was the first Education for All conference. It was held in Jomtien in Thailand. Some 170 countries took part and heads of states took part, and they committed that they would have education for all within the next so many years. India made a commitment too, and that is when we began to have large-scale programs, starting with Andhra Pradesh Primary Education Program funded by DFID, Lok Jumbish in Rajasthan, UP Basic Education Program, and the Bihar Education Program. But everything really took off when in 1995, the District Primary Education Program began. And there was a lot of urgency on curriculum and textbook development because it was felt that this is what was holding back learning and quality in a very big way, especially in government schools. Before this, there had already been Operation Blackboard to make sure that there was material and equipment and some training. But the curriculum and textbooks were way behind, it was felt, and this came up. There were several issues of quality at the time, apart from enrollment, lack of teachers, multi-grade issues, multi-level situations, and of course, issues in terms of learning levels. Now, one interesting thing that happened was that, and then this is very crucial for how things have evolved. Almost every state initially turned to their own SCERT and to the NCERT to help them to make their own state curriculum. And all these institutions, either they were understaffed or ill-equipped or did not have the capability, they would take so much time that the money that was coming in was lapsing. And states were being compelled to return that money back to the central government. As a result, states felt that rather than lose that money, they needed a different mechanism. And that's how they started creating what are now called state resource groups. This was a necessity imposed on us due to the fact that the institutions were unable to respond in time. So when they started creating state resource groups, something else happened. Till this time, almost everybody who worked on curriculum was a very senior person, mostly male. And I created a term for them. They were FOEs, that is fathers of education. There were not very many mothers at that time. And expert committees. So curriculum was something that was developed by experts for non-experts. And very often the experts didn't understand this situation of the non-experts, and that reflected in what happened. Now, we worked in a large number of states. At that time, I was chief consultant to the government of India, specifically tasked with curriculum development, pedagogical improvement. In about 18 states, we tried out various things. I'm not going to give you the story of each of those states. I'm going straight into what we learned, which is still of relevance today. Now, a curriculum document, you can have many definitions, but it is meant to talk not only of what children are expected to learn by what stage, but also why that and why only that is significant. You can learn thousands of things, but it's a selection. And how should learning happen given our context? Typically, curricula at that time tended to talk, and even now for that matter, often talk more about the what and not enough of the why and the how. The moment you start doing that, you realize that everybody has a different point of view. And in fact, as we worked on developing curriculum, we realized that every group had its own perspective, its own pulls, pressures, desires, what they wanted to see in children, what they believed education was for. And actually, curriculum development is a political exercise. It's a contested exercise. For example, when Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the prime minister, certain things were done. And when Arjun Singh became later the education minister, he wanted to detoxify the curriculum. So curriculum is not simply an academic thing. It is contested, it is political in nature. And it either ends up reinforcing power structures, or sometimes it tries to challenge them. And this is important to understand, because in a curriculum, when you, as I mentioned, you can have thousands of things, but what do you select? Whose knowledge do you select? For example, tribal children know enormous amounts about trees, plants, animals. Should curriculum include that? Tribes who migrate every year from one place to another, they understand geography in a certain way. Is that part of geography knowledge? Whose language? In a place, there are so many languages, and only now, after the RTE, we have begun to talk about home languages as being part, or multiple languages as being part of education. So very often, if you want to bring in a folk language, many others who are in powerful positions, they say, no, this is going to ruin things. Religion plays a very big role. There have been many instances where which religion gets represented more has been an issue. Whose worldview? And very interestingly, if you want to understand this, and you should want to understand this, because we often think of curriculum as a given thing, but it is not a given thing. It is a selected thing. In every curriculum, some will tend to succeed more and not all. And that is why it's important to understand whose curriculum it is. And when you develop it, these questions need to be sorted out right in the beginning. Just to explain it, I'm going to use an analogy. You all know the story of the hare and the tortoise. So after the race that they had, the tortoises decided to create their own school. In their school, you were not allowed to run fast. You could not be thin and light. And when they wanted to assess you, they assessed you by swimming. When the hare saw this, that, oh, these people have their own, we'll make our own curriculum, our own school. In the school of the hares, you were not allowed to go slow. If you were seen as heavy, you were laughed at. And when they wanted to do assessment, you assess them by having a race on land. If a tortoise ever joined the school of the hare, they would fail. And if a hare ever joined the school of a tortoise, they would fail. Now, if you look at our schools, who fails and why do they fail? That's a question to keep in mind. So this naturally leads us to think, then who should be making the curriculum? Whose interest will be represented? And this led over the years to several kinds of extended arguments, conflicts, issues. But it's important that it is not left only to experts. And it is important that it is not left only to those who are higher in the social hierarchy, but that all sections are involved, empowered, capacitated to take part in the curriculum. And that is what was tried out. And actually, it really did make a difference. If you notice, till about 2005 or so, in India, learning levels continue to go up. And this is one of the reasons. And of course, the problem with the fathers of education also is that they are responsible for a lot of the mess we are in. And I'm in that same age group myself now. And what happens is that if you ask them to make things better, it's difficult for them to acknowledge that what they did was not okay. So curriculum development has to negotiate many of these things. Once you get going, you have to ask questions like, who is the child? Who is the teacher? What is the minimum that you expect at school? Are you designing it for what you think of as a private school, as a good school? Or are you designing it for a school which communities who send children to government schools, that kind of school? Is that what you're looking at? And interestingly, the notion again is that those who go to government school are backward. But actually, they bring enormous amount of knowledge and experience. For example, a rural child who's 9 years old can take a bullock cart and go 10 kilometers away, buy grass for cattle and come back, which you can't expect a city child to do. They do different things. It's just that they have different strengths and capabilities which are not often recognized. So as a result, what happens is that if before you make the curriculum, you don't agree on all those underlying questions, then what happens is that once you've made the curriculum, everybody attacks and says, oh, this is not there, this is not okay, this is not connected. So it's very important that all the underpinnings that underlie a curriculum are agreed upon and captured in documents and made explicit. And so that before somebody says this is okay or not okay with the curriculum, they see why it has been made the way it has been made before they can comment on it. This is one of the biggest lessons that we learned. And in the recent NCF that was developed, you will notice that 25 position papers were asked to be developed. This emerged from the process that I just mentioned. Now, every curriculum has to negotiate a line between what you want, what you desire. So you want the best for your children, but actually you are limited by what is practicable. So for example, once you know that 60% of your teachers in primary school are teaching more than one grade at one time, which means that children are not going to get a certain amount of input or more than a certain amount of input, it immediately means that you need to temper your desires. But if you do that, then we are not going to get growth. So there is always this tension between what we desire and what is actually practical. Equally critical, this is just so that we understand, our job is, when we develop a curriculum, our job is not, we learned this, it's not to come out just with a document. It is to come out with learning at the end of it. So you can have a conceived curriculum, but you're not able to write it well. You may have written it very well, but it may not be understood. If people do understand it, they may not be able to implement it. Even if they implement it, it may not get achieved. So there are gaps between all the levels. It's not so straightforward. How do you conceptualize, create, and implement a curriculum so that what you actually want does actually happen? It's a complex thing. And if you don't give enough thought to it, then like many experts before, you will just write all the desirable things, good things that should happen, which you can draw from any textbook anywhere, put it together. You will get something which looks like a world-class curriculum, which will never get implemented at all. Along with this is another thing we learned. Even after you've made a terrific curriculum, you will find that when it actually comes to teaching, in the mind of the teacher, there is a default curriculum. Because when they went to school, they learned certain things in certain ways. So you see this most in FLN. People talk of so many different stages of FLN, but in the end, teachers end up teaching it the way they themselves learned. So this has serious implications of if you want to roll out curriculum, you have to work on internal belief systems, into tacit knowledge, which is acquired through more observation rather than just being told. And currently our TPD process is not good enough to do it, whether it is in pre-service or in service. This one is very important as a point, and this is one of the reasons why the NCF 2005 failed. A curriculum that is owned by all those who have to implement it, whether it is teachers or trainers or diets or supervisors or SCRTs, if they don't feel it is the curriculum they have a stake in, they have taken some decision in it, they're not going to do it, however good it is, however world-class it is. So our tendency often is to think we must come out with a fantastic document. No, it's okay if it is not world-class, it is ordinary. But if it is owned, it will really get done. So that's why it becomes very critical how you develop it, who do you involve, what decisions should be taken by whom. So for example, if teachers can take certain decisions in the curriculum, they will become co-creators and then they will implement it better. There's always been a lot of debate on who should develop. Tendency always is to go towards the experts. The recent NCF is an example of that. But in our experience, in about 20 states and 3 other countries, when you decide, you create a profile of who should be involved, and you are able to come out with a terrific test, which involves interaction, you working with materials, working in groups, responding to things, etc., etc., a long list of things. Then you get the kind of group who have proven themselves to be there. Then they don't take nonsense from anyone, and they come out with the best possible curriculum. People often think that when curriculum is to be developed, you need about maybe 100 people, but actually you need 400 people. You need to represent geographies, all the geographies, gender, communities, echelons. All of this really matters. If you bring in only experts, it ends up being a curriculum that is very good on paper and only on paper. So when you work on a curriculum, you need to spell out what your vision is, what your aspirations are, what are the beliefs, assumptions, values, and aims. And this is the desirables side. And this has to be balanced by what is the context, what are the ground realities, and what are the implications of these ground realities. For example, a very important ground reality in India is that a majority of children are not able to attend school every day or for the entire day every day. Think of this again. When you make a curriculum assuming a child will come every day and the child doesn't come every day, then your curriculum is going to fall flat. You need to design it in such a way that a child can enter it again and again, that there is reiteration, that the progression is cyclical rather than linear, so on. So all of this actually has been done in India. Later, I will share with you some sources. It's important that all of these underpinnings, they are written down as base papers, thematic papers, implication notes, implication as in, if this is what you believe about children. For example, if you believe that a child is not an empty pot to be filled up, a child is not like wet clay to be molded, the child has some elements of a seed to be nurtured, but many other things, then what does it imply for what learning should be, how it should be done, how training should be done? Those implications have to be written down. Those guidelines have to emerge from this. So there's an entire process before you make the curriculum that you work on all of these dimensions and you derive from them what does it mean for the curriculum. If you straight away go into making the curriculum, you will just put what is in your head rather than what is actually appropriate. Another important point is that, as I mentioned, for the child, a curriculum is what the teacher actually does. If the curriculum cannot be localized, it doesn't really gel with children. So how do you do that? So the NCF itself is a framework. From that, you produce things in such a way that there are certain decisions, certain adaptations that can be made at district, block, and school level. As I mentioned, whose knowledge is knowledge. One interesting example I want to give you is from Gujarat in 2012. A curriculum was developed wherein, every district made a series of 50 books about that district, and the main textbook deriving from the curriculum. It had a lot of openings and questions. For example, compare the height of the crops grown in your district, or look at the bus roadways map and find out how far your school is from the main bus depot in the district. And in the classroom, children would work with that local material to answer these kinds of questions, and so on. So it is quite possible to come out with a centrally produced framework, but that is locally implemented. One of the big issues in curriculum development was that how do you know the damn thing works? And is it possible? So while you develop the curriculum, maybe over a year or 2 years, there are sections of it that need to be field tested. And of course, long-term evaluation must happen. At the moment, it doesn't. For example, the NCF 05 was never evaluated, and there is a price to be paid for that. And lastly, the big lesson that we learned is that it's not enough to make a curriculum, but you have to have an implementation plan. How will that reach every single teacher, parent, child? How will it be internalized by all concerned in a manner in which they understand and can implement? how will not only they know what to do, but how will they know if they're doing it right? How will it yield results? If you don't plan for that, then you just have a document and that's it. You've ticked the box, but you haven't got results. Now, all of these lessons I want to mention that though they were learned in DPP states, and many of them were documented and captured and available in textbooks, when the NCF 2005 was being made, for various reasons, the NCERT decided not really to learn much from these except to make thematic papers. And I call that a disaster because we have a world-class document which has never been seriously implemented anywhere. Very limited. It's a national document with hardly any implementation, and many of its provisions like CCE were actually discarded. One reason why is that only a few thousand people, few hundred people could really understand the language of the NCF. It has to be written in the language in which the ordinary person, say the parent of a child, even can understand it. A very big failure in that was that when it said constructivism is to be emphasized, what does it mean in terms of classroom process exactly for a government classroom which is not well resourced? It was never spelled out very strongly. It was never implemented and shown, and that remained a very big issue. And as I mentioned, the focus remained more on the what rather than the how. Though the NCF talked about integration across subjects, but they went ahead and produced a maths book for class 1 separate, language book for class 1 separate. Though it talked about continuum, it produced class-wise textbooks and so on. So there were a lot of contradictions between what the NCF was and what its manifestation was in terms of the textbooks. A very big issue. So, NCF talked about bringing in local knowledge into the classroom. It talked about continuous and comprehensive evaluation. It's very important to understand that in the normal kind of evaluation that we did, the teacher was the powerful person and he would say, look, you better do well or you will fail in this. But in CCE, what you actually were doing was assessing whether the teacher was successful or not. You were trying to find out if the teacher was fulfilling his duty towards the right of children to learn. It's reversing the hierarchy. And when you do not look at a curriculum from a power perspective, you think it is a clinical goody-goody thing with just an academic document, you come across these big hurdles. You have to prepare for it. The NCF did not see ground realities. For example, again, they produced books where they assumed that there will be 1,000 hours of actual teaching learning time, but no school gets more than 650 hours, really speaking. They produced large-size books, which at that time, the government schools could not be open because children were sitting crowded next to each other. And the books were too costly to be given free to children. What the NCERT also did was that they called a lot of outside people, NGOs, and they made it. And as a result, the NCERT people themselves, the staff in NCERT and many of the SCRTs did not feel that it was their job. For example, a professor complained to me, our only role is to give TADA to all these outsiders who come and make it. And therefore, you will find that at that time, NCERT people themselves started saying things like, oh, constructivism is not the only sole thing. There must be a balance between constructivism and behaviorism, and thus diluting the thrust of the document itself. So it became overall a lot of hype. And as of now, I can still say there is no evidence that NCF 05, despite being a terrific document, was implemented. So there's a lot to learn. And also after NCF, we have a stasis in learning levels. Steffi, how am I doing in terms of time? Okay, I'll try to finish
Subir, we have time.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
we have
I want to
another
share with you,
5 minutes, then we can go in for the question.
I want to share with you very quickly that quality is a kind of ecosystem. You have these desirables, the vision, belief on one side, the feasible on the other side. Based on this, you create a set of components which includes curriculum, syllabus, pedagogy, materials, which includes textbooks, digital content, everything. classroom organization, planning, assessment, school management, community involvement, etc. One of the big lessons we learned was that if you produce good curriculum but don't have equally appropriate textbooks or assessment that backs it up, your curriculum is going to fail, and the other way around. So there is an organic link between all of these. There's also an organic link between these and those things which are outside the school, like recruitment of teachers, their training, their deployment, their working conditions, monitoring systems, administration, institutional development, performance assessment, program evaluation, etc. These things often don't support what happens in school. And lastly, we do not see our whole system in terms of outcomes at multiple levels, which is, if you want children, for example, to learn reading, then teachers have to know how to teach reading. But CRC, BRC have to know how to support the teacher in teaching reading. Diet has to know how to train all of these people. SCRT has to know how to conceptualize these programs and deliver them through the diets to reach all of them. If your focus is only on teachers and children, you're going to not see much progress because you have not worked on the outcomes at other levels. And so this is a big finding of that time. Based on all of this, and this document I will share with all of you later, so I'm not going to go into detail. There are several stages and steps to how to develop a curriculum. The first, of course, is at the preparatory stage, you need to identify a team, lay the ground for it, set it in position. Then in the first stage, you need to work on the vision, the beliefs and assumptions, the ground realities, and the situation. Review what you have and take the NCF as a basis, connect with it. But now you need to start getting thematic position papers, implication notes, guidelines, and specifications. Then you come to a stage where you now look at what curriculum should contain. You have basically done a lot of discussion on the why, the foundation of what you are going to include. But now you decide what is the approach. What do you mean by knowledge? Especially now that through a mobile phone, you can look up anything. What does knowledge mean? What is the approach to each subject? For example, is science only about the content of science, or is it about scientific literacy? So all of these subjects have changed dramatically. And now that AI is coming in, so there is going to be some kind of knowledge that you can acquire just in time when it is needed. But that's not your knowledge that is innate to you, resident in you. So what is the knowledge that must be resident in you, and what is the knowledge that you should acquire when you need it? Maybe you might need to reconceptualize subjects. Then you want to see in what stages of education you want to teach what. And of course, again, analyze existing curriculum or the NCF. I'm repeatedly saying this because it is difficult to make a blue sky curriculum straight from scratch, and not a good idea because there might be useful things from the earlier time that you want to retain. But at the same time, you must have a reason for what you leave out and adopt new. And now you begin to have position papers, guidelines, and draft versions. And then in the end, you put it together. This is relatively sort of more editing kind of work. But, in the process that I mentioned, you want to incorporate the key lessons. Lastly, I just want to mention that just around the lockdown time during the pandemic, the Ministry of Education asked the states to develop their own curriculum frameworks for preschool education, school education, adult education, and teacher education, saying that based on what the states make, the NCF would be made. And they wanted it to be done in a paperless manner. That created some very interesting challenges. But the key thing that I want to mention here is that when Rajasthan asked us to help them make those 4 SCFs, they said we want to involve 15 of our NGO partners who are big names, each of them capable of doing the curriculum on their own. The big problem for us was these organizations, they suspected any outside group like us. These organizations had their own agenda to push. They were all doing very specific projects. They were also competing with each other. And the SCRT team and the teachers whom we selected, though they represented the state, very often were not as competent as these groups. how do you work in such a diverse group? How do you empower them all to come together and do it? So one of the first things we did is we made it very clear that our team as facilitators would never have an opinion or a view or anything to offer in terms of content or what should be included. Our role really would be to represent children and keep asking a lot of questions so that the teams themselves could work. Initially, people found that difficult to believe, but as we progress, we basically used throughout the entire process, 2 years or more, a series of questions based on which, when people worked, we were able to point out that this is not consistent with something or there are contradictions. How do you know that this will work in ground realities? Does it match the deep understanding that you have? And so on. And slowly over 2 years, we found that a terrific feeling of being a team, a family emerged among all the people. And to my mind, that emotional connect that people had has led to the kind of curriculum document that augurs really well for the state. It also gives the state a very large number of people, several hundred people, who own it, who are behind it, and who are able to implement it so that whenever it is actually launched, which is going to be relatively soon, it will really work well. And the great achievement, I believe, in this curriculum has been that though it was made uh, before the recent elections in Rajasthan, state elections, the new government has approved it almost entirely as it was. So that's a culmination of many of the lessons that we have learned earlier in terms of being able to deliver an appropriate state-specific document, which hopefully will trigger appropriate relationships, processes, and higher order learning outcomes. And this is the last thing that I want to mention. Things have changed now. When we began on the curriculum development process, as I mentioned, knowledge was information was scarce, so was knowledge, and mainly textbooks were the things available. But now, not only we do have more books, libraries, textbooks, but we have net access, digital resources. We have millions of possible things that people can draw upon. So now curriculum has to have a very different framework. It cannot be seen the way it was before. And I'm defining this as a curriculum is a set of internalized intents. Intents as in intentions that teachers hold to deliver in the class, CRC, BRC, supervisors, HMs, trainers, diets, and SCRTs hold. That is, the intent is far more important than the content, than the material, because that now people are empowered to draw it from multiple sources. And we need to empower teachers to deliver it in keeping with the larger goals and policy, but also the local context, local aspirations, and diversity among students. So ultimately, I think we have now reached a point where we can look upon equity as a key goal by attaining quality for all and for each person. So that's what I want to share with you. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Subir. There are some questions in the chat box. I think Tiasha, Anita, I would like you to just share them with Subir so we can answer them in the 10 minutes that we have.
Sure, Steffi. I'm just going to read out some of the questions that have been shared. We had one pretty early on in the meeting. It's a longish question. It said that, what are your views on integrating gender in curriculum? Kerala apparently is leading the way with this. I'm going to just make the question a little more concise. So, what do you feel about this?
Sure. Correct. In fact, I have to say that part of what Kerala is trying to do is something that emerged from the work we did with them in 97 to 99. There were several questions discussed. For example, if you had education only for girls, would it be very different from that for boys? We also said, is there a different kind of knowledge that girls bring? there was a lot of debate on something like this, that and I know it sounds a bit stereotypical, but still, across India, girls by a certain age are all involved in cooking, and cooking is a highly mathematical exercise. But in maths, you never find that experience being reflected upon initially, especially as it's because it's seen as girls' knowledge. So one big issue always has been whose knowledge, as I started out with this, and uh, 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 the bigger problem for us always is that even if it's not simply a matter of showing girls doing what boys do and boys doing what girls do, it's about raising equity and enabling everyone to be aware of the prejudices that we deeply hold and to live life very differently. So yes, I believe that gender is a very critical aspect of uh, uh, curriculum. And another thing to learn in this, and briefly I'll mention this and I'll just stop on this, is that there seems to be a hierarchy of how our biases change. In the beginning, we tried to implement Inayla Kabir's institutional model of gender analysis and so on, and it just failed very badly. The Sussex Institute was involved, but we realized that especially teachers in government schools, they have a lot of notions about children per se, that children cannot do so many things. Then they have notions about poor children cannot do so many things. Then they have notions that children from groups, religious groups other than ours cannot do certain things. Then they have notion that groups of children from certain castes cannot do certain things. And right in the end, they have notions that girls, and that is the part that changes the last. So if you are able to, sometimes it can be done in a few days, if you are able to break this set of biases in this sequence, each layer creates the ability to and security to understand that yes, the bias is in me and I need to change. Then you are able to reach a point where gender issues can be addressed in a manner that is like an appropriate debate. Otherwise, you only have statements like, "Oh, you want us to go sweep the room? That's what you want us to do." So gender is quite a complex thing. It's not merely about putting it in the document. It's about how you conceptualize it, how you think about society itself differently, and how you see change happening. And I think that in some places, Kerala is one of them, but in other places too, I believe it has been tried, and to some extent it succeeded before things were thrown out for different reasons.
In fact, there have been some questions also related to taking the idea of gender beyond just the binary and going to transgender. There was even
Sure. Correct.
that was also
Sure.
addressed. Since we have very little time, there are a few more questions that I'm going to come to. We can continue this conversation, as Kavita has said, in the future. In fact, we'd really like to continue this. So the questions of what and why of curriculum seem to point us towards more philosophical questions, such as what does a fulfilled life look like? What are the essential ingredients that make a fulfilled life? What kind of a society do we wish to create? The person who asked this question wanted to know whether there has, these questions require building of consensus. So they wanted to know whether any such consensus building exercises have been attempted anywhere. And
yes, as I mentioned, 18 states these were done. So let me just put it in perspective. So typical visioning document would say something like this, that if you go to the kind of school that we want to create, in the beginning, you will not find a teacher because she is somewhere sitting among children, and you will find different children doing different things. And you describe the kind of process, and you would see in that description a reflection not only of pedagogy or of classroom, but also the kind of equitable society that we want to create. But this was then backed by what are the beliefs and assumptions that must happen. Therefore, what is it that the curriculum must highlight? What kind of textbook, what kind of assessment, what kind of... So there were these implication notes. And then there was an implementation plan for making it happen. And actually, this was, for example, in Assam, when CRC coordinators were selected, there was a workshop conducted among all teachers. And when 5 people were identified as having performed best, they were all interviewed in front of each other and in front of the whole group, so that there was ultimately a consensus that this is the person who should be the coordinator for all of us. So there were many democratic practices, equitable practices that were actually implemented on the ground. The problem in all of this, including in Kerala was one of the first states to actually do something like this. And you may not know this, but before the Kerala implemented it, it was ranked 31 in NAS. But after those 3 years, it came in the top 3, and it has always been there. But one of the things that happened was that teachers who were empowered in the process started asking a lot of questions. And people at the top found that very uncomfortable. I'm just being polite here. And very often, in several states, a large number of people, like in Kerala, 500 people were transferred on a single day who had been resource persons in this entire process. The SPD, State Project Director, who had actually facilitated, enabled this, he was implicated on a case of embezzling money, which was false, and so on. So what happens is that you are actually in these processes, you are in a hierarchical system, which is a command and control system. You are creating a different empowered echelon, and then the hierarchy strikes back. Often the empire strikes back, so to say. Very often this happens because governments change or leaders change, and this is not allowed to be continued. But I just want to put it on record, and I have it all available. Maybe I'll share it, that such consensus building exercises were conducted, and including most recently in Rajasthan in 2022 and 23. And they are available. Very often they are public documents. They're reflected in the curriculum, and sometimes they're reflected in the textbooks as well.
Subir, we have questions are pouring in. So just wanted to check with the...
I'm okay with time. I can be here with you all for another 20
For
minutes.
those of you who want to stay on, I think we might need until 6:15 because there are quite a few questions. I have a couple of questions from our viewers on the YouTube as well. One is that one was, what kind of roles will AI play in education? And what are some dangers that people and organizations should consider in that regard?
Okay. So just to address this, I will not claim to be an expert in AI. In any case, probably hardly anyone is, because it's a sort of starting field. But I just want to mention this so that it just becomes clear. The learning that we want to promote is about what happens inside your mind, what happens to your mind. Let me just, I'll give you one example. Suppose I say that I was standing at a bus stand. You will start thinking of all the noise of the bus stand and the buses there, and maybe there's a banana shop or there's water on the ground. But if my statement actually is, I was standing at a bus stand in New York, then suddenly that image will change. You will have something else. Now, this is such a small thing, but in everything that we do with learning, it is what is happening inside your mind when you create understanding, when you apply things that you learn. So, for example, if I ask a question like, give me, and you can try this later after this event is over, give me 7 similarities between a needle and an elephant. You're going to have to struggle to find out what is common between them. And it is what you are doing in your mind and what you acquire through that process. That is the learning that we want to generate. This is quite different from opening ChatGPT and saying, tell me all about compound leaves found in Honduras. So what AI will do is that it will help in certain things. It will help you produce certain results. But if you want children's minds to develop, then the development of the mind requires certain ways of exercising that mind, and that is not going to change dramatically in a very big way. What will happen is that the teacher will now, to an extent it happened with tech, the teacher will now be flooded with possibilities of what they can do. So the big thing for a teacher is, how do I decide? How do I choose what my child needs, and how do I decide what is the right thing to do? Maybe you say AI can tell you, but AI is not going to know every single child. So there is still, I believe that we are jumping the gun, because if everybody's idea is that the purpose of education is to pass NEET exam, then yes, AI will help you. But if the purpose of education is to become a certain kind of person, then AI will be limited. In fact, AI can be quite problematic also, because it makes you lazy, it prevents you from thinking, it brings in all the biases that are stored in the database on which it is based, and very often it is just plain wrong. So it has to be used with some degree of care. So I think with the coming in of AI, the discrimination ability, the ability to think what is right, what is the right thing to do, the pressure on that has gone up a lot more than it was. It will ease certain things like correcting papers. It will certainly make it easier to teach children with disabilities, maybe. But at the same time, it has its limitations. So a lot depends on how you conceptualize education, how you see what it is that you want to generate in children, and then decide what is the role of AI in it. It is not a given that AI will do something or not. It's a tool like anything else. Like you can use a pen to write nonsense or not write at all, or create a fantastic image or a great novel. It's a bit like that.
Related to that question is one that about edtech organizations, they seem to be their priority seems to be more to sell their product rather than understanding schools as institutions for nurturing ecosystems. So the person who asked this question say, why don't they join as teachers instead of running startups and be okay with learning less?
They are not going to do it.
Yeah.
But
So
I want to mention this very briefly. I've said this many times. I'll just repeat what I've said elsewhere. Is this that the thing about tech will always fail if it sees its main role as giving answers. So if you have a tech comes on and says, I've got a fantastic way now to help you learn, and here is, let's say, this application of mathematics. But the thing is, suppose I happen not to want to learn mathematics at that time. You are answering a question that I never asked. It's not in my mind. And the term for it is that when you give this kind of information to somebody who's not asking for it, is the term is spam. And much of technology is like spam. The way to go really is, and this we tried out a lot during the pandemic, technology works extremely well when it is low tech, not when it is high tech. And that's the reason why tech industry has a lot of problem, because you can't make much money in low tech. You make money when you use high end tech. Let me give example of what low tech does and why high tech doesn't work. So if you look at the old feature phone, has SMS. If I send an SMS to children, find out what is the total number of teeth all your family members have. Find out from your parents how your favorite dish is cooked. And tomorrow when we talk, tell me about it. You will find every child is very eager to come back and say what they found. Every feature phone has a mobile, has a camera. So I will say that find out the exact, take photo and find out the exact time when the shadow of a stick is the shortest. Tell me next day and send me that photo. Or I will say, plant a seed in the in soil and take a photo every day. Then see over 7 days, you see the seed growing. Every feature phone has a stopwatch. So I will say things like, run and then measure your pulse rate and see if it is changing. Or how long can you keep your eyes open? Or how many words can you say in 20 seconds? I can do thousands of things with this kind of thing. Why? Because please note, in all the examples, what I've done is I've put the actual action to be done onto the student side, which is of interest to them, based on which now I can derive learning and I can do many things out of it. But what high-end tech will do is, it will say, here is a child, now see his pulse rate is this, now he's running, he's come back, his pulse rate is this. Man, this is boring as hell. And why this happens is because all these edtech guys, unfortunately, they went to IITs and IIMs and they think that is what learning is, that is what education is, and this is what they make And I have I work with a lot of edtech companies on things like competency frameworks, dependency frameworks, on material, on personalization. And I can tell you, and I've written a book on the topic. It's called Child Development and Education in the 21st Century. We looked at 800 or so research papers, meta-analyses. Look at Dr. Hattie's meta-analysis. Look at the report of OECD countries after 20 years of application of computer, and you will find there is no evidence that computers help in learning. And there's a lot of evidence that below the age of 8, it is counterproductive and harmful. So in reality, because it is a vendor-driven thing, this person who asked the question is right. Why don't they teach? If they actually went to teach, they would stop doing the edtech business. They would do something else. And that is the reason why it doesn't happen. Like in everything else, do you know that during the pandemic, because edtech took off, when schools were to be reopened in several states, the edtech companies, because they are very moneyed, they were able to put pressure on governments not to reopen schools and often delayed it by 2 to 3 months, depriving children because they wanted their edtech products to be used. So we are not talking of an edtech, we are talking of an exploitative process over here. And it has to be seen in that light. Technology has a lot of potential, but not in the way the edtech companies are doing it. And if anyone is offended, I'm quite happy.
So my glitching a little bit.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, for Sai to talk about the question because she had a political angle to it, Subir. So, Sai, since you had asked the question, if you're able to unmute and ask directly.
Yeah. No, thank you. I have heard Subir's point of view, and I absolutely agree with what he says. I think my question was more political because there's a mushrooming of a lot of non-profit organizations and other kinds of education-based organizations that are operating outside the school framework because their focus is more on shareholder value. See, organizations like Ekalavya were very, very different. They were integrated with the social structure, right? So my question was purely political. It wasn't so much on technology.
I entirely agree. And the whole purpose is to exploit and perpetuate the notion that children are not learning well. I'll extend this. It's not only at tech companies, since you mentioned non-state organizations, NGOs and others. Every NGO or many NGOs will do in the beginning of the year one baseline. At the end of the year, they will do one end line. And maybe several lakh NGOs will show in the country that their children have learned and learning has progressed. But NAS will show no, learning has not improved at all. There's some frauding going on over here because the whole point is, and in fact, before the pandemic, there was a momentum built up where every organization was trying to run down and diss government teachers by saying that they don't teach, they don't know, they don't, so on. And actually, when the pandemic lockdown took place, it was actually only government teachers who really held the fort and did a serious amount of work. All other private schools really abandoned children or charged parents a lot of money for doing things. That is when it became sort of clear. Why were they doing that? Because when you go to donors, you want to say that teachers are not teaching and with our materials, they will start teaching, or the schools are very bad with our stuff. If they were very good beforehand, then you don't want to acknowledge it. So I think this, if you look at organizations like Eklavya, they came into the field. People I know, I was also a member of Eklavya. I know that everybody who joined, they joined at a salary which was like 1/5 of whatever they were already earning somewhere else. And they lived in very difficult circumstances. I lived without a toilet for 7 years. So, that's very different from the kind of situation we now have, wherein you hear among these organizations discussion like how quickly you can change from one organization to other in order to get a salary jump. And so when the purpose is of that kind, then the product will be of that kind. And the result of it that I see from a political angle, I will say that they are harming the system in this way too, that they are now taking over the delivery function of the government. So in SCRTs, in diets, you will find that people have placed their own staff members, and they are doing the work with the SCRTs and diets should be doing. And you will see that a lot of NGOs are advertising for, staff to be employed. But actually, SCRTs and diets continue to have vacancies. The top 6 diets of Rajasthan, they have a vacancy of 42%. But NGOs who are working there are employing more and more people. So ultimately, what is happening? The system is being withered away by this kind of input, and it is the commercial motive maybe that really is driving it, rather than actually making a difference to children. And if children were really to start doing very well, I think a lot of people will have a lot of problems. Take a look at, for example, if you look at LinkedIn, you will find a lot of organizations celebrating the work they are doing with teachers. They go somewhere, they have a meeting, then they write about it in a big way. I'm a member of a large number of teachers groups. I never see teachers at all anywhere celebrating any event of any NGO that they've been to. So we have got a repeat of this hierarchy where, those with money, foreign degrees, social positions, they are basically, it's a non-state actor, a dominant situation, and EdTech is one part of it.
Thank you, Subir. I think in line with that, I believe it's Lipsa who asked this question. I'll just read it out. What does it take to keep working in the education space, given that, there are so many things happening? With this, in the midst of all the progress that's taking place, then again, having to restart, perpetual questioning of every single thing that we're doing. And, the sheer scale of everything that needs to be done, but keeping in place the integrity of the work as well. What's the way in which we can keep building our own inner resilience, and to continue doing this work? What thoughts on that?
This is a deep question. So I've written a piece on this. It's called How to Work in Primary Education and Still Be Optimistic. It's in my blog, and I've written a blog. You'll find about 100 articles there. This is one of those articles. But basically the thing is, we have to know what game we are in. And unfortunately, things have got a little more complex in recent times. But in early 2000s, like for example, and I worked in one of the best curriculum exercises I did was in Bihar. Mr. Lalu Yadav was the chief minister at the time. And 13 workshops were held over 1.5 years. A draft document went. And don't forget that Lalu Yadav studied in JNU. He had one look at it and he said, if this is what children study, who will ever vote for us? And that curriculum was buried. And we said, a day will come when Laluji is not there, and we still are. So look at this as a 30-year, 40-year, 800-year exercise. It is not something that is meant for short-term, quick result. Then you will only be ultimately reinforcing what exists. Status quoist approach is what will come out, because that is what will see light of day. Another thing, from that same analogy, I want to say, as a politician, he did what was his job to do. As a person working in this field, my job is to not allow that to get me down. It's like in cricket, no, the pace bowler's job is to bowl so fast that you are afraid or you get out. And your job as a batsperson is to say, no, I'm going to hit him out of the park, man. So you have to know what your role is. You have to not be afraid. It means that you will not, or sometimes not have a job, like I don't. It will mean that you are going to be very unpopular at times. That will happen. Truth telling is not a safe exercise, generally, in today's time, even more so. And now it's more complicated because those who should be of our fraternity, I just talked about the non-state actors. They are actually, really speaking, more eager to reinforce what exists, because there are some prizes to be gained by doing that. So I think it's a question of your own integrity, of reinforcing and supporting each other, but most important of all, of having, this is going to sound very boastful, I apologize in advance, but if your process is of the kind that nobody can do it as well as you can, then irrespective of how painful you are as a person to others, you will be in demand. You just have to sharpen your game, because this is what children expect from you. I have often used two quotations to sort of remind me. One is that for all our shortcomings, children will pay the price. And second, that it is the right of every child in India that we who want to work for them work at our highest, best, inconceivably best possible level, not at our even second best. That's every day you get up, this is what you have to do. So I think, I'm sorry to give you a very abstract sort of response to this, but it is very concrete in the sense that you have to look at your situation, keep finding your way, like water finds its level. You have to just not give up, find better ways. And I think in every few years, we have found better ways. And in the current situation, in the next 2-3 years, again, you will see that certain different ways will emerge.
Thank you, Subir. That was really true and very powerful. Thank you for sharing. And I think we are over time. We are already 12 minutes. We have
Okay,
taken
if
more.
all of you are okay, I'm still okay.
Yeah,
Somebody
I
asked
think
for our email address. Please share that.
yes.
That.
Yeah. So we'll close here, Subir. I think we'll definitely have more session with Subir. We are hoping to have him more on our Backbenchers event. So please be we'll have to close up now. And I would like to say a big thanks to Subir for this
Can I give one
meaningful
message finally in the end?
Okay, okay.
But I request that all the questions in the chat, if you can send the chat to me, and I will also try to respond on social media to some of these. And if you give me questions on LinkedIn or wherever, I will also respond if I can. And of course, we hopefully will have more interaction at some later time.
Yeah, that would be really helpful, Subir. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here and sharing your journey of developing curriculum with the government. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, all the participants for taking the time and being over here. And we are sure we're going to be having more sessions. So please stay tuned. Actually, right now on the 21st, we are having a launch of Abhyas platform. So those who are in Mumbai, please, if you are there, if you know someone would be interested, please share the invite with them. We are putting the link for the registration in the chat box. At the same time, we also have an upcoming event called the Well-Being Learners Series hosted by Catalyst 2013. Over here, Kavita Ananda, founder of Adhyayan Foundation, along with the other speakers, will also share about the organization's well-being in a collective change. This will be the topic of their conversation. So if you would like to sign up for that as well, the link is given in the chat box. And once again, a big thank you to everyone for being over here. We look forward to having all of you in the coming sessions.
Thank you, and bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for staying back as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Subir.
Thank
We'll
you.
be emailing these links as well and these invites to everybody. So if you missed them, don't worry, we'll send them across.